some crazy stuff, yo!
Up in the sky, look!
It's a bird!
It's a plane! It's Superman!
Hey, it's Superman!
Created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, Superman came to light up this world in 1938 through the pages of Action Comics. DC, then a small comic book company, didn't know it had gold on its hands until the public gave its verdict. Hand in hand with Batman, Superman quickly became the icon not only of American society but of the pantheon of superheroes we know and love today. The concept of a man with the powers of a god has always been fascinating, but Superman did not become famous precisely for that. His strength does not lie in his ability to fly or his heat vision, but rather his strength lies in his heart. However, we're not here to analyze a character that everyone already knows. We are here to tell a story that marked a before and after in the superhero genre. Kirk Alyn had the privilege of being the first actor to wear the blue and red suit in the 1948 serial film and its 1950 sequel. These adaptations did not age very well due to the limitations of their time, although they retain a certain charm. Likewise, Columbia Pictures stayed true to Superman's origin story, starting with the destruction of Krypton and Kal-El's arrival on Earth. From there, Clark Kent would have to deal with both his human side and his alien side. From the Daily Planet to classic characters like Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen, this 15-part series, aired in theaters, was the first contact with Superman for many people and made it clear that the Man of Steel had a future on the big screen. But before that, the character wowed American viewers with Adventures of Superman, a TV show premiered in 1952 with George Reeves as the last son of Krypton. If you're wondering, George Reeves is not related to Christopher Reeve, even though they both played the same character. Some would call it a coincidence, others would call it fate. With 104 episodes and over 6 years on air, Adventures of Superman was another step in the right direction for DC, even though the show did not feature iconic villains like Lex Luthor or Brainiac. Instead, they focused on exploring the different facets of Clark Kent, from his weakness to kryptonite to his soft spot for Lois Lane. In addition, they also managed to create the character's first live-action flying scenes, as Kirk Alyn's adaptation used animated scenes for those moments. While the 20th century was treating Superman well, other superheroes were not having the same luck. Characters like Captain America, the Phantom, and Batman himself tried to replicate the serial formula of Columbia Pictures' Superman without much success. On the other hand, The Dark Knight jumped to fame with the 1966 series starring Adam West and Burt Ward, which was the second television victory for DC. Unfortunately, it didn't last long. As the decades passed, certain sectors of the population began a boycott campaign against superhero comics for their alleged violence, sexual, and archaic content. Public discontent resulted in the creation of the Comics Code Authority, in charge of regulating the content in American comics and softening it for children readers. This measure cut short the evolution of our favorite characters, and their fame began to plummet alarmingly. Things on television were not favorable either, since the space for Saturday shows was reduced. This is how we reached the 70s, a decade in which superheroes were barely remembered. Only a miracle could save them from total oblivion, or a man. A Clockwork Orange, The Godfather, The Exorcist, Star Wars. Those are just some of the gems that cinema gave us in the era of flare pants and punk rock. The seventh art was turning to a much more serious and fantastic tone that was pleasing among the fans. It was impossible that a guy in tights could sneak in among the top exponents of those days. Well, it seemed that way until a peculiar poster started appearing in every movie theater. Its slogan was short but powerful: "You'll believe a man can fly." From its early days in the comics, the idea of a Superman movie was all too appealing, though difficult to realize. While the Kirk Alyn and George Reeves adaptations were entertaining, they were no match for the epicness of the father of superheroes. Superman deserved a film capable of competing against the Hollywood blockbusters. For that, they needed a great director. It all started with Richard Donner, a relatively new director in the business who was enjoying his first hit, 1976, The Omen. One day, Donner got a call from a certain Alexander Salkin, a name that may not ring a bell, but he was one of Hollywood's top producers at the time. Salkind, in a true Vito Corleone style, made Donner a proposal he couldn't refuse: to direct the first big superhero movie with a salary of up to $1 million. Even so, the project had already been rejected by directors such as Francis Ford Coppola, William Friedkin, and Richard Lester, to name a few. Alexander Salkind and his son Ilya and his partner Peter Spangler had the film rights of Superman since 1974, but could not find an ideal director for their dream project. Steven Spielberg was also in consideration, at least on Ilya's side, though his father preferred to wait for the release of his Fish film. That film turned out to be Jaws. By the time Alexander changed his mind, Spielberg had already committed to Close Encounters of the Third Kind. During the search for a director and also a protagonist, the production had already hired such heavyweights as Marlon Brando and Gene Hackman as Jor-El and Lex Luthor, respectively. They had better shoot their scenes fast since those two were never short of work. For the script, the producers initially turned to Alfred Bester, a science fiction writer who eventually dropped out because Alexander felt he wasn't too famous. His replacement was none other than Mario Puzo, a screenwriter of the first two Godfather films. As you can see, the project had a generous budget thanks to the alliance with Warner Brothers and an agreement to shoot 2 films at the same time. This was Alexander Salkind's usual practice, as he showed in 1973's The Three Musketeers and its 1974 sequel, The Four Musketeers. Alexander was a somewhat controversial figure for the same reason, as the actors of The Three Musketeers did not know they were filming a sequel. According to their contract, they signed on for 1 film and thus received the salary for only 1. As a result of their complaints and demands, the Screen Actors Guild created the Salkind Clause, a law that prohibited splitting a production into 2 films if it was not agreed upon in the contract. Beyond this controversy, Alexander managed to convince his favorite director for the project, Guy Hamilton, responsible for James Bond gems such as Goldfinger, Live and Let Die, and 2 other films. Also, Hamilton was not in the habit of carrying a gun where he shouldn't, as was the case with director Sam Peckinpah, who in a negotiation with Ilya Salkind threatened him with a gun and said, "You gotta shut up, kid. What do you know about making movies?" For some reason, I feel he wasn't the first director to do that. Hamilton seemed like the final choice to adapt The Last Son of Krypton to the big screen. The problem was that his background wasn't entirely clean. When the production moved to England, he couldn't get in due to a tax evasion problem. Something similar happened with Brando in Italy, as he had legal problems in that country for sexual obscenity charges, consequences of Last Tango in Paris. In the midst of all this, the filmmakers had to deal with a huge script of more than 400 pages. Robert Benton and David Newman were hired to rewrite it, delivering an apparent final version in 1976 that had a cartoonish tone, with a special appearance of the character Kojak, played by Telly Savalas. In the hypothetical scene, Superman was searching for Lex Luthor among all the bald men in the city. When he thought he had found them, the man would reveal himself as Kojak. For obvious reasons, this idea was discarded. And to this nonsensical script, some lousy test flights in Rome, and you have a film that seemed to have entered into production hell. Hamilton ended up leaving because of this and his legal problems, leaving the director's chair empty again. The Salkind had Mark Robson in their sights as a consolidation option, but found a light of hope in the success of The Omen. That's how we return to the starting point, Richard Donner, who came to bring order among so much chaos. He started with the script, or should I say the script mountain, because after so many rewrites, it ended up exceeding 550 pages. Donner, who had grown up reading the original Superman comics, made the necessary changes to the story under the guidance of his collaborator, Tom Mankiewicz, a screenwriter who was not considered part of the film by the Writers Guild. Still, Donner insisted on recognizing him as the film's creative consultant, a title Mankiewicz managed to retain after a legal dispute. In the end, not a single word of Mario Puzo's script was used in the final version. By this point, we already have renowned actors and a director up to the challenge. However, we are still missing the most important part. Initially, the company wanted someone famous, so the names like Al Pacino, Steve McQueen, or Clint Eastwood came up. Along the way, less usual candidates such as athlete Bruce Jenner and boxer Muhammad Ali also came up. Robert Redford had a substantial sum on the table to play the hero, although he turned down the role because he felt he was too famous for the role. Actors such as Burt Reynolds, James Caan, and Paul Newman also declined. Sylvester Stallone was a favorite of the producers, but Richard Donner opted to cast an unknown actor, initiating a casting process that included more than 200 candidates. Patrick Wayne was the favorite until he had to drop out due to the terminal cancer of his father, the legendary John Wayne. With the process back to point zero, Lynn Stallmaster, the casting director, turned to one of the names that had caught her eye during the auditions, Christopher Reeve, a stage actor who had no major film experience. However, Donner and the producers turned him down for being too young and thin. After dealing with guys with imposing physiques who could barely act and others who could act but didn't look anything like Superman, the filmmakers again gave a second chance to Reeve. As he was asked to use padding for his muscles, Reeve preferred to start a training process with David Prowse, the man behind the Darth Vader mask. Thanks to that, Reeve gained 10 kilos of muscle before starting filming, which began on March 28, 1977, and lasted until October 79. 19 months of production for 2 films with rising star. Even as the most expensive film of its time with a $55 million budget, Superman faced hundreds of challenges during production that drove up its cost. Principal shooting began at Pinewood Studios in England, where the Krypton scenes and special effects took place. They did not go well. The flight tests of terrible quality, with dummies that ended up crashing or actors in front of a chroma key that looked even worse. They definitely couldn't convince anyone that a man could fly, except the producers. They were happy with the development, but fortunately, Donner came to save the day, along with Zoran Perisic, a visual effects artist who had a revolutionary idea. This genius invented a system called Zoptic that made it possible to superimpose images on a background completely, being able to move the focus and camera as best suited. Zoptic was combined with chromas, miniatures, and a system of pulleys and cables to support the actor during flying scenes. When the visual effects team showed their first scenes under Donner's direction, there was silence among the filmmakers. They couldn't believe what they had in their hands. Superman was alive. However, it wasn't all good news in the production. Donner had to deal with the ego of Marlon Brando, who refused to memorize his lines of dialogue since he was only on set for 12 days. His only interest in being Jor-El was money, earning over $3 million and almost 12% of the total box office. He was supposed to use that money to produce a 13-episode miniseries about Native Americans, yet the project never materialized. If The Godfather star wasn't enough, Donner was in constant conflict with the Salkins and Spengler over budget costs that kept escalating and the delay in filming. Donner didn't even know how much budget he had available. The producers would simply step in to tell him they couldn't do what he wanted. Eventually, Donner broke off relations with them, and director Richard Lester was hired as a temporary co-producer, even though his real job was to mediate between the director and Salkins. With an increasingly tight schedule, the director had to use the ending of the second film in which Superman flies around the world for time travel. It was a stopgap measure as he had another ending in mind for the first film. Well, I guess he was never able to make that ending because we already know how it turned out. Since the producer wanted the film to be released on Christmas, Donner didn't even have time to see a final cut with the special effects. He could only see a projection without sound, but it was enough to give the green light. Now, there was only one step left to promote the film. With a character as famous as Superman, the film already had many fans willing to give it a chance. Still, Warner Brothers went further and promoted the movie everywhere, inserting the image of the superhero into people's daily lives. Product diversification was one of the first strategies adopted by the company. The movie not only led to the creation of toys and clothing, but also expanded the character's reach to office supplies and household appliances, opening up new product categories. The toy line, launched by Mego Corporation, included action figures, vehicles, and playsets that became big sellers and paved the way for future franchises. The impact of Superman merchandising transcended US borders, becoming a global phenomenon. In international markets such as the United Kingdom and Australia, Superman-related products found an enthusiastic audience. Adapting products to suit local preferences helped increase the character's appeal in different regions where he was already famous in the comics. Superman was on every corner. You could even find him in your soup, but he didn't produce boredom. On the contrary, actually, audiences were eager to see him on the big screen. The movie had better be worth it. The film was originally planned for June 1978, when it could coincide with the 40th anniversary of Action Comics #1, the character's official debut. However, due to problems during filming, it had to be delayed until the end of the same year. Barely 2 months after filming was completed, Superman the movie premiered on December 10th, 1978, at the Uptown Theater in Washington, D.C. Donner was finally able to see the fruits of his labor, and boy was it worth it. And on December 13th, the film was screened at a charity event organized by European royalty and attended by Queen Elizabeth and Prince Andrew. Over the next few days, the film began to spread to theaters in North America and around the world. But what did people think? Well, of course they loved the movie. Every part of it, the special effects, the music by John Williams, and the faithfulness of the characters to their core comic book counterparts. Everything was perfect, but without a doubt, the soul of the film resided in Superman. Thanks to a Christopher Reeve capable of portraying the most superheroic side of the character to his more human and reserved one. Warner Brothers knew they had a box office hit in their possession, although even they didn't expect it to be so powerful. Superman broke a lot of records at the time, surpassing the $300 million mark globally. It was very rare to meet someone who didn't go to the movies to see Superman, and it was even rare to meet people who didn't like the movie. This was the case of the very creators of Superman, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, who did not agree with the film because of the legal dispute they were having with DC Comics over the rights to the characters. Fortunately, time put things in their place, and they were grateful for the realization of the film. Among so many awards and nominations, Superman won a Special Academy Award for visual effects for the work of Zoran Perisic and his collaborators. It was also nominated for Oscars for Best Editing, Best Score, and Best Sound. Superman was a sensation of the moment, and still is to this day. The Salkinds' initiative to shoot 2 films in parallel eventually paid off, as just 2 years after its release, the Superman sequel hit theaters with General Zod as the main villain. It resulted in another box office success, but this time without Richard Donner's backing. Due to his poor relationship with the Salkinds, he decided to jump ship even though he had filmed 75% of the sequel. Richard Lester was in charge of finishing his work. As a successful franchise, Warner Brothers did not miss the opportunity to squeeze it to the end, deriving in a 3rd and 4th part that had nothing to do with the magic of the first one. Not even Christopher Reeve could save the situation. After almost 10 years playing the character, Reeve decided to hand over the cape to the next generations. Actors like Dean Cain, Tom Welling, Brandon Routh assumed the role of the last son of Krypton, in different adaptations of the story going through cinema and television. Recently, Henry Cavill had the chance to become the Superman of the 21st century, though it turned into wasted potential due to Warner Brothers' bad decisions with the failed DC Comics extended universe. Now the cape belongs to David Cornsweet. Now we have a new Superman, a young actor who will mark the beginning of the new DCU under the direction of James Gunn. Will he live up to Christopher Reeve's legacy? Only time will tell. But it's curious that the film is called Superman Legacy. Today's cinema belongs to superheroes as much as cowboys had their golden age back then. All thanks to Superman the movie, which made it clear that a comic book character could be a goldmine and a competitive brand in the market. As a result of its success, DC gave its other star, Batman, the opportunity to shine in 1989 in the hands of Michael Keaton and Tim Burton. Marvel was not far behind either, with films like X-Men, Spider-Man, and Blade laying the groundwork for today's MCU colossus. And that's just for the movies part, as there are countless TV series, video games, toys, and other products that came out thanks to the commercial boom that the Superman film was. Beyond putting superheroes on the map, Superman the movie was and remains a beacon of hope among so much darkness. A call to do the right thing when everyone seems to do the opposite. A symbol that makes you believe you can fly.